Welcome to the Deep Dive, a production of Reformed Thinking. We take complex theological concepts, we look closely at the source material, and we try to pull out the clarity you need to be well-informed. Today, we are taking really a microscopic look at just 4 verses. But they might be 4 of the most theologically packed verses in the entire New Testament. John 1, verses 9 through 13.
They really are. And these verses, they function almost like a bridge or a hinge.
Right.
John's narrative pivots here. It moves from that cosmic, eternal description of the word, the logos, to the hard historical fact of Christ's arrival, the true light stepping into our world.
Okay, so with that in mind, what's our mission for this deep dive?
Well, it's really 2 things. First, we have to get a solid handle on why the Creator, when he showed up, was met with such complete rejection.
That's a huge question.
It is. And then second, and this is maybe the most critical point, we need to uncover the exclusive source of the new life that can turn one of those rejectors into an adopted child of God.
And that second point, I think, really frames our whole discussion today. It forces us to make a really important distinction.
What's that?
Well, we have to separate the condition for salvation, which is, receiving Christ by faith, from the actual cause of it, the thing that generates it.
Which is being born of God, regeneration.
Exactly. And the material we've synthesized for today, it just consistently points to the fact that this new status, this idea of becoming a child of God, is grounded entirely in a gracious, a sovereign divine work.
Right. It can't be traced back to human effort or religious traditions or even, your family heritage.
None of it.
And John sets this up just brilliantly. He gives us the glory of Christ's identity, then this tragedy of the world's failure in verses 10 and 11.
And then the remedy.
And then the sovereign, gracious remedy that's provided to a certain group of people in verses 12 and 13. I think understanding that widespread rejection is key, because that failure proves that human ability, even at its most religious and sophisticated, just isn't enough to produce saving faith.
It's the very problem that regeneration solves.
That's it, exactly.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Let's establish the identity of the person who is at the absolute center of this whole narrative. John's prologue, those first 5 verses, it doesn't just introduce Jesus. It introduces the eternal, personal, fully divine Word. The standard our sources say is set for the Logos is just impossibly high. He is the ultimate agent of all creation.
Oh, absolutely. John just lays it out. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. There's just no wiggle room there.
And no ambiguity at all.
None. The Word has the attributes of divinity, of eternity, and on top of that, he's the active force in creation itself. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made.
So he's the maker. He can't, by definition, be a part of the creation he made.
He has to be distinct from it. And then John adds that the life residing in this divine Word is the light of men. That eternal truth just sets the stage for this dramatic shift in the story.
The move from that majestic cosmic reality into our history, the incarnation.
Yes. And we see that movement start right in verse 9. The narrative shifts from, eternal existence to the concrete historical entry of the true light. The Word, the eternal Son, takes on human nature.
This is the doctrine of the incarnation.
It is. He enters history as a real man born in time, but, and this is the key, without surrendering his deity in any way. That's the staggering reality here. The one who holds all things together, the source of all being, just steps into the world he made.
That phrase, the true light, in verse 9, it seems to carry a ton of weight. Why does John use the term true, the Greek word alethenon? It seems to suggest he's not just a light, but the final, definitive one.
And that linguistic deep dive into alethenon is so critical here. In John's writing, it means so much more than just not false.
Right.
It means ultimate, genuine, full. It's almost always placed in contrast to something that was, provisional or partial or just preparatory.
Yeah.
So the true light is the final and the highest disclosure of God's truth and grace. He's the source itself, not just a reflection.
So it's like when Jesus later calls himself the true bread or the true vine. He's saying the previous versions, like the manna in the desert or the nation of Israel, they were real, but they were shadows. They were pointing to him. He's the ultimate reality they were symbolizing.
That is the perfect analogy. The earlier institutions, the earlier food, the earlier revelations, they were all partial. Christ is the genuine article. So this title, True Light, it distinguishes him from every preceding revelation in redemptive history.
And the sources are clear that those other things, the law, the prophets, John the Baptist, they all gave real light, necessary light even.
Oh, yes, but it was partial. Preparatory. They were like lamps in a house, or maybe like the moon reflecting the sun's light. Christ, on the other hand, is the uncreated brightness. He's the source from which every lesser light gets its very existence and its intensity.
Which is why John the Baptist, back in verses 6 through 8, is so carefully separated from the light. His whole purpose was to witness to the light. But he was, and John is emphatic about this, not the light.
And that distinction is so intentional, so important. I mean, John the Baptist was an incredible figure, a man sent from God, but his light was completely derivative. It came from somewhere else. His whole job was to point away from himself and toward Christ.
He was sort of the last and greatest of the Old Testament prophets.
He was the zenith of the Old Testament preparatory lights, yeah. He was leading up to the very moment when the true light would arrive in person. John just makes absolutely sure that no one confuses the herald for the king. The true light is self-sourced. The others are sent.
Okay, so we have the ultimate revelation, the Creator himself, entering his own world. Now let's talk about the scope of this illumination, because John says this true light gives light to everyone. That phrasing seems really central to understanding God's universal revelation.
It is. Gives light to everyone. It refers to a universal shining, and we can really break this down into a couple of layers, all flowing from the Word.
Okay.
So first, you have the most general revelation, the light that shines through creation and through conscience. Since Christ is the divine Word who made the world, the very structure of creation reflects his invisible attributes. People know God in a real way just by living in his world.
That's the same principle Paul lays out in Romans 1, isn't it? That humanity is without excuse because God has made himself plain to them. They have enough information to be held accountable.
It connects perfectly. Romans 1 describes how knowledge of God's attributes is clearly perceived in the created world. And then Romans 2 talks about the inner witness of conscience, where the law is written on our hearts, testifying to God's moral standards. All of that initial pervasive light flows from the Word.
And it's not just creation, is it? It's also historical.
Right. As Christ comes in the flesh and as the gospel spreads, that light reaches people of every nation. It confronts everyone with the person and the claims of Christ.
The notes we looked at really zeroed in on a dual function of this universal light, which seems incredibly important for what comes next in the passage. The light doesn't just guide, it also exposes.
It acts as a decisive force. The light absolutely sheds light on truth and reality, but, and this is critical, it also reveals the rebellion in others. This universal shining confronts every single person with Christ's existence and his claims, and it ensures that humanity stands without any excuse before God.
The moment the light hits the darkness is exposed for what it is.
That's right. So the same illumination that draws some people to repentance, it simultaneously condemns the spiritual condition of those who turn away from it.
So it's not the light's fault.
Precisely. The light is intrinsically good. It's the reaction to it that separates people. Just as Jesus says later, this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light. The universal presence of this light is directly related to human condemnation. This general illumination, it never saves anyone automatically. What it does is expose and seal the guilt of those who willfully turn away because they prefer their own moral autonomy.
And that transition in John's gospel is so abrupt, so devastating. After the majesty of the light, we are hit immediately with the deep shadow of the human response in verses 10 and 11. Let's start with that staggering irony of the world's blindness.
It really is the ultimate paradox. John tells us the eternal Word was in the world, and the world was made through him, and then the punchline. Yet the world did not know him.
It's absurd when you think about it.
Just think about the absurdity. The Maker is present in his own house, and he's treated like a stranger. The one who spoke the cosmos into being walks among the very creatures he formed, but he's ignored. He's unrecognized. He's denied his rightful place.
But wait, if the world was made through him, didn't everyone have at least some level of intellectual knowledge of him just through creation? So the failure to know him must be something deeper than just a failure of intellectual awareness.
That is the essential point John is making. In his gospel, knowing is not just bare factual awareness.
It's relational.
It's relational recognition and acceptance. It's a covenantal knowledge. To know Christ is to recognize him for who he truly is, the divine Word, the Creator, and to receive him as Savior and Lord. And the world here, it refers to humanity in its fallen, God-opposing state. That fallen world, which is characterized by suppressing the truth, it just failed to grant him that relational recognition.
So the ignorance isn't from a lack of information, it's a moral failure. The light was sufficient, but the response was one of suppression.
Absolutely. The true source of the ignorance is internal. It's not external. People had real accessible knowledge through creation and conscience, like we just discussed, but they suppressed that knowledge. They refused to honor him as God. The universal response of unbelief is the most vivid portrait of human depravity you could ask for.
Our minds are darkened. Our hearts are hardened.
And our wills are turned away from God. The failure to know him is a choice, and it's a choice rooted in rebellion.
It reminds us that the problem isn't in the quality of the light, but in the diseased nature of the human will.
The human heart, as the sources put it, loves the darkness. It actively wills the darkness. This is not passive ignorance. It is a willful moral and spiritual refusal. The light shone universally, enough to leave all of humanity without an excuse. But the defining condition of the fallen world is that stubborn suppression of truth, which ultimately leads to condemnation.
And if the universal rejection by the world shows us depravity, then the next rejection, the rejection by Israel, his own people, shows the depth of that sin in an even more heightened, specific way.
Yes. The rejection by his own people is it's just heartbreaking. And it's so specific to covenant history. Christ came to his own possessions, his land, his people, and his own people, Israel, did not receive him.
And this is happening among the very people who had the most incredible spiritual privileges.
The highest privileges imaginable. They had the covenants, the law, the prophets, the temple worship. They were being prepared for centuries to receive the Messiah. And they still rejected him.
This rejection among the religiously privileged seems to make a huge theological statement about the insufficiency of what we call externalism. That's a keynote in Reformed theology.
It is a profound warning, and it cuts against every form of inherited or ritualistic salvation. The tragedy here shows that sin is so deep that it can flourish even under the cover of religious forms and practices.
Even in the church.
Even in the church. Outward possession of covenant benefits, sacraments, temple rituals, circumcision, heritage, even knowing the scriptures backwards and forwards, it does not equal saving faith. Israel, the nation with the closest possible connection to God's covenants and his light, still rejected the promised king.
So the lesson here is that just being familiar with religious things, being surrounded by the institutions of God, it doesn't secure your heart. You can be descended from Abraham and still reject the promised son.
That's right. The rejection by Israel just emphasizes that you can be steeped in religious culture, you can have attended services your entire life, been baptized, confirmed, and still be a total stranger to the Son of God. The physical descent from Abraham, which the Jews so often relied on for their assurance, is shown to be meaningless without faith in Christ.
It's a profound warning.
It is. It warns that external connection to covenant blessings cannot produce the necessary new birth. It just drives home the need for a radical, internal transformation no ritual, no matter how sacred, can ever accomplish.
Okay, so moving from that darkness of rejection, John introduces this contrasting reality in verse 12. He says, "But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." That "but" is so powerful. It signals a group of people defined not by their heritage or their rituals, but by their positive response.
That contrast of "but" is the point where God's grace breaks into history. Despite the universal rejection we just talked about in verses 10 and 11, there is a specific company of people who did receive him and who believed in his name. This dual human response is the immediate condition. It's the human requirement for being adopted into God's family.
Let's define that response really carefully. What does it mean to receive the Son, and how does that relate to believing in his name?
To receive the Son is to welcome him as he truly is. It means embracing his person, his full deity and his full humanity, his claims to be Lord, and his saving work on the cross. It is an act of submitting your entire self to him.
It's more than just a polite interest.
Oh, far more. It's not passive acceptance. It means opening your life to him as Lord and Savior. It means taking him to yourself in a decisive, life-altering act.
And that idea of reception is then clarified. It's specified by the phrase, believing in his name. This seems to be the language John uses to define genuine, saving faith.
Exactly. To believe in his name means to personally rest your confidence entirely on everything that his name summarizes. This belief covers Christ's complete identity, his unique status as the Son of God, the Messiah, and his mission to save sinners through his finished work. The sources define this as the soul's embrace of the Son as he is presented in the gospel. It's a posture of personal trust.
So let me see if I have this right. If I agree with the historical facts of the gospel, but I don't personally rely on Christ for my own justification, that wouldn't qualify as belief in his name.
It would not. Biblical, saving faith, the kind of faith spoken of here, it's not just knowledge that the facts are true. I mean, even demons have that. And it's not just agreement that they're possible. It is personal reliance on Christ alone. It's turning away from every other source of hope or effort or righteousness and just resting everything on his person and his work. John ties salvation directly and exclusively to a specific person, Jesus Christ, and to this definite active response of trust.
And the immediate, incredible result of this welcoming response is a new legal status: adoption. Christ gave the right to become children of God. That word right suggests legal authority, and it really emphasizes that this new status is a pure gift.
It's granted with sheer generosity. It's not something the believer achieves or earns. The word for right here is exousia, and it's a term that speaks of legal authority or entitlement. The very fact that we are given the right means we had no prior claim to it whatsoever.
It's a legal transaction.
It is. This legal transaction, which we call adoption, it grants the believer a new legal standing and a new saving relationship before God. They're moved immediately from being defined by sin and being under wrath to being inside God's household.
Why do you think salvation is defined here primarily as adoption into God's family instead of just, say, forgiveness of sins? What does that family reality add to the picture?
That's a great question. Forgiveness is the legal cleansing, but adoption is the relational dignity that comes after. Adoption brings a completely new identity. It establishes a new relationship where God is truly known as Father in a saving, covenantal way.
And a new liberty.
A new liberty, yes. We're now sons and daughters, not slaves who are bound by fear or the law. And of course, it ensures a new inheritance. We become heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. This status is absolutely exclusive. It draws a sharp distinction between those inside the family and those outside, in direct contrast to the rejection we saw in the previous verses. It's a permanent status of being legally and relationally accepted into his saving family.
That language of adoption is so potent, it elevates the believer to the highest status you could imagine. Not just a servant, but kin.
It completely refutes the idea that being saved is just, having a clean slate. It means being elevated to the dignity of a family member with all the rights, all the privileges, and the relational intimacy that comes with that status. It is a work of grace that changes our entire legal and spiritual identity.
And now we arrive at what is probably the most concentrated theological point in the whole passage, verse 13. While verse 12 lays out the condition, faith and reception, verse 13 explains the hidden reason why anyone is actually able to meet that condition in the first place. This is the engine of the entire process.
This is exactly where we shift our focus from the flick of the switch, which is faith, to the unseen sovereign engine that runs the whole system. That's regeneration. And the notes are crystal clear on this. The capacity for a person to successfully receive Christ is entirely dependent on a divine prerequisite. We call it new birth or regeneration.
And the source of this new birth is absolutely exclusive. It's God himself.
The sole positive source is stated so simply, but so powerfully, but of God. New birth is defined as a divine act. It's a work of God's sheer, unsolicited grace from start to finish. It's achieved by the sovereign will of the Lord, who grants life where there was only spiritual death.
So the ability to believe is a miracle.
It is a miracle of God's will, totally independent of human merit. This work is also described in other places as being born of the Spirit. It's a unilateral act of quickening the soul.
And to make sure that no one could possibly mistake this for some kind of cooperative effort, the text immediately piles up 3 explicit denials. They seem designed to rule out every single potential human contribution to the new birth. This really guards the sovereign nature of God's grace.
Yes, the 3 denials, they systematically eliminate all forms of human effort or lineage or religious externalism. And they're placed so strategically to contrast with the rejection by Israel, who, so often relied on those very factors for their standing.
Okay, let's start with that first denial, which deals with heritage, not of blood.
This one rules out physical descent, ancestry, ethnicity, family tradition, any kind of Christian heritage. In the first century, this was aimed directly at Jewish pride, which often rested its assurance on the phrase, "We have Abraham as our father."
Right.
This denial teaches that no one becomes a child of God in the saving sense just by belonging to a specific family line. It didn't matter if it was Jewish lineage then or a modern line of, churched families today. Spiritual life is defined by faith, not by your lineage or your blood relation. Your spiritual status is not inherited.
That is a direct confrontation of that common assumption that just being born into a covenant community somehow guarantees spiritual life.
It is. It confirms the absolute necessity of individual supernatural regeneration, regardless of how pious your parents are or the history of your nation. As Jesus says, the flesh profits nothing in the realm of the spirit.
The second denial is even broader, nor of the will of the flesh.
And this one rules out relying on fallen human nature in any form. This cuts against all forms of moralism or self-effort or religious striving. Moral effort, religious discipline, asceticism, self-improvement, none of it can bring about this birth.
So even our best efforts are useless here.
Fallen human nature, even at its most sincere, cannot raise itself from spiritual death. The will of the flesh, that is, the unregenerate self trying its best to please God, is just incapable of initiating this spiritual transformation. It is not achieved by the strength of our body or our fallen mind.
So if someone tries to make themselves better or follows a really rigorous religious code hoping to earn God's favor, that is just the will of the flesh striving in vain.
Exactly. This is the biblical answer to Pelagianism, or any system that suggests a sinner has some innate ability to choose God apart from God's prior work. The dead do not decide to become alive. The will of the flesh is a denial that human willpower, no matter how strong or disciplined it is, can generate spiritual life.
And then the third denial is the broadest of them all, ruling out any kind of external decision-making, nor of the will of man.
This rules out any other human decision, and it encompasses actions taken by others on behalf of an individual. It specifically eliminates any reliance on a parental choice, or a priestly action, or some ecclesiastical right.
So no one can do it for you.
No parent, no priest, no preacher can, by their own sheer decision, or a sacramental action, or a liturgical rite, create a child of God. This guards against any kind of magical view of the sacraments. It makes sure we understand that while ordinances are necessary, they are not the source of life itself. The new birth is not an ecclesiastical or a familial project.
So if we put these three denials together, what we see is a complete and total exclusion of all human contribution, whether it's physical, moral, or external, to the source of spiritual life.
The conclusion is just inescapable. The new birth is entirely and exclusively the work of God. It is a sovereign, gracious, unilateral intervention.
Let's circle back to that original distinction we made. The cause and the fruit. Regeneration is the hidden cause, and receiving Christ faith is the fruit. Can we elaborate on the relationship between those two?
Sure. If you use that analogy you brought up earlier, regeneration is the unseen engine that provides the necessary power. Receiving Christ, or faith, is the flip of the switch that makes that power evident. The switch only works because the engine is already running, powered by God's will.
So, to put it plainly, a person doesn't get born again because they choose to believe. They are able to choose to believe because they have already been born again.
That is the Reformed reading of this text. Regeneration, being born of God, is the hidden causal work that enables the response. It removes the stony heart, and it grants the capacity to embrace the light. Receiving Christ, faith, is the conscious experiential fruit of God's prior work. It's not the trigger that activates the new birth.
The ability to believe is a gift.
The capacity to successfully receive Christ is a gift given by God in regeneration. So the entire ability to become a child of God rests completely on divine sovereignty and grace, which ensures that God receives all the glory for it. Faith is the necessary condition, but regeneration is the necessary cause that produces that condition.
This whole dynamic ensures that salvation, adoption, and even the ability to believe are all understood as a gift from start to finish, not a human achievement. Which is really the only possible conclusion given the deep depravity that John detailed back in section 2.
That's right. The rejection by the world and by Israel proves the engine is dead. Verse 13 reveals the divine mechanic who replaces that engine, and by doing so, enables the act of faith.
Okay, so John 1.9 to 13, it's brief, but it really does provide this concentrated theological map for the journey of salvation. Before we wrap up, let's just synthesize the main points into a cohesive Reformed view, and then maybe apply these verses to correct some popular contemporary errors, just like our source material suggests.
I think that's a good idea. The synthesis confirms a really tight logical flow. The true light, Christ, provides the ultimate revelation, ensuring that everyone is without excuse.
Right.
Then the widespread rejection reveals that sin is a deep-seated moral refusal, a preference for darkness, even among the most religiously privileged people.
And then salvation.
And then salvation is defined entirely by faith, new birth, and adoption by grace.
And the sources we've looked at make it clear that this particular structure, this order, is vital for guarding against theological drift. So let's look first at how this passage refutes the error of, say, generic spirituality, which is a very common error today.
Oh, very common. Generic spirituality promotes this vague feeling of being spiritual or believing in something bigger while completely ignoring the specific claims of Christ.
And this passage refutes that how?
Well, it ties salvation to a specific person, Jesus Christ, the true light, and it requires a definite personal response to him. The true light is not one spiritual option among many or some template for all other prophets. Salvation is about receiving the Son, the Word made flesh. John leaves absolutely no room for a spirituality that rejects the exclusive claims of the Son.
Another error this passage confronts directly is universalism, the idea that God's love or his light will eventually just save everyone.
John is so explicit about the division here. The text draws a sharp, definitional line between those who receive Christ and are adopted, and the world in Israel who did not know or receive him.
So the light shines everywhere, but it doesn't save everyone.
Right. It shines universally, but it acts to expose stubborn refusal. It does not automatically save everyone it shines upon. We have to take seriously the fact that the family language, children of God, is an exclusive gift, and it's tied to the condition of faith in the Son. To preach universalism is to completely contradict the tragic reality of verses 10 and 11.
And given our focus on regeneration, a really relevant correction here is aimed at some decision-centered methodologies in modern evangelism. I mean, if new birth comes but of God, then relying solely on the human decision to initiate salvation has to be flawed.
It does. The necessity of being born of God confronts any method that reduces salvation to a quick formula, that treats it like a human project that could be achieved through, psychological pressure or emotional music or some clever technique.
The decision isn't the cause.
The sources state plainly that the new birth is not switched on by a human decision. Rather, the human decision is the fruit and the evidence of God's prior work. This passage forces us to rely entirely on the Spirit's generative work, knowing that without it, even the most persuasive sermon is completely useless.
And that distinction ensures that evangelism stays focused on proclaiming the gospel and summoning people to faith, while relying on the unseen miracle of God's will to give life. It keeps us from reducing faith to just a signed card or a momentary surge of emotion.
And finally, the text gives us a crucial correction to moralism and religious externalism, a theme we saw so clearly in Israel's failure.
Right. Israel had all the highest privileges, the temple, the law, the covenants, and yet they failed.
Their failure is the ultimate warning against religious routine. Relying on religious tradition or routine sacraments, rituals, church culture, ethical living, it does not and it cannot produce new birth. The focus has to be on a vital, personal reception of the true light, not on mere religious compliance.
Familiarity doesn't save.
No. Familiarity with the language, the place, or the customs of God's covenant does not produce saving faith. You can be surrounded by Scripture and worship your whole life and still be hostile to the Lord.
So this synthesis really confirms that the true light holds up a mirror and it exposes the ingrained spiritual disease of the heart, whether that heart is, pagan and unaware or religious and self-satisfied. The structure of John 1:9 to 13 is a powerful defense of God's sovereignty and salvation.
And the positive application of this teaching is incredible assurance for the believer. If you can look inside yourself and see a genuine desire to receive Christ, you can have confidence that it's because God has already performed the miracle of new birth inside you.
So our standing isn't based on us.
Your standing as an adopted child rests not on your own performance or your fluctuating feelings or your perfect behavior, but on God's sovereign, completed act of new birth and the finished work of his Son.
It grounds our spiritual confidence entirely outside of ourselves.
Absolutely. And it fuels our evangelism with both a sober realism, recognizing that the light was rejected by many, and a profound confidence, knowing that the God who grants new birth still works through the foolishness of preaching to bring dead souls to life.
That's a great place to land.
The true light shines on every person, but it really does act as a powerful mirror. It doesn't just illuminate the world, it exposes the state of the human heart, and it reveals its preference for darkness. The choice that's presented in this passage is stark, and it's exclusive. Either you're one of the many who refuse to recognize the Creator and suppress the light, or you are one of those who, by God's gracious, sovereign act of regeneration, received him and were granted the right of adoption.
John will not allow us to take refuge in some vague spirituality or to rely on a thin shell of religiosity that was passed down through our family. The passage sets before us the Lord who made the world, who entered it, and who grants eternal family rights to all who come to him in repentant faith. So the question for you is, have you personally welcomed the true light as your Savior and Lord, thereby finding in him the grace of new birth and the dignity of being called a child of God?
That is the core question presented by the structure of John 1.9 to 13.
Thank you for engaging in this deep dive. We will see you next time.